Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to make comments on the presidential speech. First, Mr. Speaker, allow me to congratulate Senator Asige for the representation of persons with disability, and indeed agree with her in most of the comments, particularly in making sure that accessibility to persons of disability to services, and particularly to government offices, is observed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, having said that, allow me to make comments on this speech, Mr. Speaker. And looking at paragraph 19, Mr. Speaker, as one of the senators has spoken in this House on the comments of the President in terms of fighting corruption in this country, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that fighting corruption in this country is not in how much we talk about it and how much we shout about it, Mr. Speaker, but in how much we invest in the institutions that are mandated by law, Mr. Speaker, to deal with matters of corruption. And, Mr. Speaker, the President, in his speech, made it very clearly that he is going to respect the separation of powers of the various arms of government, Mr. Speaker. And in that, Mr. Speaker, the President already has made sure that funds to the judiciary fund are increased. Mr. Speaker, in the quest to fight corruption...
Honorable Senator, sorry, just a minute, Honorable Senator Mandango. The Senator was just closed the floor. Kindly walk to the bow and then you can close over. Proceed on Senator Mandango.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, the President, in his commitment to fight corruption in this country, has committed to empower the institutions responsible, Mr. Speaker. And we know, Mr. Speaker, one of the ways to empower the institution is to give them resources that they can then be able to deliver that service. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, in this country, access to justice has been limited by the number of courts, Mr. Speaker, we have across this country, and by the number of judges, Mr. Speaker, available to deliver justice in this country. Mr. Speaker, by increasing the funds to the judiciary, the President intends to ensure that justice is served at the nearest point to our citizens in this country, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, want to confirm to this House, Mr. Speaker, that the President and his administration has every intention of making sure that the fight against corruption is upscaled, but in a new manner, Mr. Speaker, where the institutions responsible are given the necessary resources. Mr. Speaker, the President, in his address, discussed about the issue of subsidized fertilizer availing to counties and regions that are going to experience short rains, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the President for this initiative and add that, Mr. Speaker, this subsidized fertilizer that is being moved to regions that are going to experience short rains, as a Senate, Mr. Speaker, and aware that agriculture is 95% devolved, Mr. Speaker, we would like the ministry to work with county governments to ensure that this fertilizer reaches the intended farmers. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, county governments have data of their farmers, they have extension officers in the field, and when national government sends a fertilizer to counties and indeed gives it to counties to distribute, then we are confident that the intervention will produce the desired results, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, other sectors of agriculture have also been touched by the President, and I know a senator here alluded that it seems at the onset of this administration, probably regions that never voted for this administration are being discriminated. I want to say in the President's speech, Mr. Speaker, he talked about 23 counties and about 23 million Kenyans who are facing starvation. And the speech did not specify that those 23 million are those who supported this administration, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the intervention that is being put by the President to ensure that we have food through the subsidized fertilizer is timely and welcome, but we encourage the national administration to make sure they work with county governments who have the actual data and who know the actual farmers in the counties so that these fertilizer can then reach the intended population. Mr. Speaker, on the President's speech on paragraph 27, the President informed the House of the reduction of the cost of credit by the mobile operators or the online lenders, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the President for having consistently talked about this in his campaigns and in his few days in the office, Mr. Speaker, engaged these lenders and already succeeded in ensuring that the cost of credit has been lowered by 40%, Mr. Speaker. But let me say, Mr. Speaker, the lowering by 40% by these operators is welcome, but I would want to still say that percentage outstanding is still extremely very high. Mr. Speaker, I say this because if you check on the lending rates of these online lenders, Mr. Speaker, the interest rates go as high as 24% after the reduction that was recently given by these operators, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we would urge the operators to actually lower the cost, probably, Mr. Speaker, if not lower than what the banks are lending, equal to the rates the banks are lending, Mr. Speaker, because this is a credit that is available to a majority of Kenyans at the comfort of where they are doing their business. Mr. Speaker, on the ASLA fund, this is a fund, Mr. Speaker, that will be a game changer in this country for our youth, depending on how the legislation, the legal framework, the regulation, and the training that is going to be offered to all the borrowers to ensure that this is sustainable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, many young people in this country have so much innovations, and some of these innovations, Mr. Speaker, have been stolen from these young people. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that there are blue chip companies in this country who have taken advantage of our young people and their innovations, and for lack of capital, actually stolen the applications and the innovations from these people. Mr. Speaker, this fund is going to sort the problem of applications or innovations of our young people and citizens of this country being taken over by multinationals because of their financial muscle to develop this, Mr. Speaker. This affords our young people and the country the opportunity to innovate using easily accessible and affordable credit, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these funds, the administration has promised to make sure that they are available at the ward level, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a Senate, we would ask the national administration to make sure that county governments are involved at that level so that every Kenyan in every part of this country can be able to access this ASLA fund, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we would like, as a Senate, to also be part of this process in oversighting these funds to make sure it is sustainable, Mr. Speaker. We've seen in the past, Mr. Speaker, funds like the Youth Enterprise Fund, Women Enterprise Fund, has made an impact, but not the impact that was desired when the funds were being established, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we would like to see this ASLA fund program succeed so that we can reduce the level of unemployment in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the President, in a quest to make sure that Kenyans have access or live in decent houses, Mr. Speaker, has proposed to invigorate the housing program, the affordable housing program, Mr. Speaker, that has been going on, Mr. Speaker, but has faced a number of challenges. Mr. Speaker, I support the President in this initiative because once launched, Mr. Speaker, the development of about 250,000 units will create a very high opportunity for employment. Mr. Speaker, I also want to note that housing as a function is a concurrent function between county governments, and the national government, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it should be well noted, as this program is being initiated, that the sharing of assets between national and county governments, particularly on housing, Mr. Speaker, was not concluded, and the national government still holds to all the housing lands in the country that were supposed to be shared. And if this program is to succeed, Mr. Speaker, county governments must be involved so that this program can be availed to all counties, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also on this housing project, Mr. Speaker, as we are aware, this was a program that was ongoing. There will be need, Mr. Speaker, on this housing program to ensure that local contractors, local materials are used in this program, Mr. Speaker. We want a situation where a county like Machakos, Mr. Speaker, should be able to be supplying sand. And the cement that is being manufactured in this country, Mr. Speaker, is actually used in this affordable housing, Mr. Speaker. We don't want a situation that we saw in the last program, Mr. Speaker, where the contractors were importing cement in millions of tons, Mr. Speaker, from China, and by the time the program was being launched, all materials for the construction of affordable housing were actually imported materials, and all our companies were suffering from depressed markets because the cement that was available then for these programs were also finding its way into the market, creating unfair competition, Mr. Speaker. I urge this House, Mr. Speaker, to be very keen for us to be able to develop legislation and frameworks that will safeguard the local contractors, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also realizing the magnitude and the volume of this project, Mr. Speaker, and the cost and the funds that will be involved, there is need, Mr. Speaker, to integrate the development of this housing with capacity building of our contractors and all our young people in our universities, Mr. Speaker, so that we build local capacity, and in the future, local contractors should be able to undertake all these kinds of construction, Mr. Speaker. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because when the national government commenced the program of constructing the expressway, which we expended